In the years after World War I, Austria, and in particular the city of Vienna, was marked by horrible supply crisis and hyperinflation. What is known today as Vienna settler movement was actually nothing more than a grassroots endeavor to mitigate severe affliction by way of self-help initiatives. And the thing with the self-help initiatives will be a topic later on. Thousands of Viennese citizens illegally felled trees in the Vienna woods in order to procure the wood they needed to heat their homes. But they also farmed vegetables on small plots, sometimes without the required authorization. Nearly 200,000 settlers arrived around 1920. On many of these wildly cultivated tracts, the people built small homes. And as more of them arrived, the areas became settlements. Otto Neurath. In 1920, the Austrian political economist, sociologist, and philosopher of science, later one of the leading figures of the so-called Vienna Circle, Otto Neurath founded the Austrian Settlement and Allotment Garden Association. And there he worked in the early 1920s as somehow the manager of those wild settlers. Together with the very, very young Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky and others, among them Adolf Loos, he made some elementary contributions to the improvement of the life of the settlers, who would soon be organized in cooperatives. For Otto Neurath, the ideology of Gemeinwirtschaft was a model of associative governance combined with social welfare and centralized planning. Neurath saw himself not only as a theoretician, but understood that the mission of scientific national economics was tightly interwoven with sociology and set against background comprising strong pedagogical intentions. I cannot show something about the pedagogical work of Neurath here because out of time, but it's a very interesting aspect of his work too. But now to the growing house, and my work related to the general research of architectural theory in it. Martin Wagner. Between the First and the Second World War, Otto Neurath was not only the main protagonist in Vienna developing central ideas for the Minimalwohnhaus. As an important mentor, and in this sense also a successor as well as a critique of Neurath, the German architect, theoretist and urban planner Martin Wagner also took part. His principal work bears the title Das wachsende Haus, the growing house, that up to today earns the right to be included in discussions about the procurement of bargain living space. In 1929, Martin Wagner took part at the Siam Congress Wohnen für das Existenzminimum. Before this conference started, Siegfried Gideon mentioned, seeing that architecture and production methods stand behind normal development, houses will be at the same time be worse and more expensive in comparison, while in other areas the price of even extremely complicated products such as cars will permanently sink, and the quality will go hand in hand with effective industrialization. So the demand for further expanded terrain for building will allow the industrial process to take effect. In other words, land reform, combining of essential land in the one hand and extensively organized land planning in the other. So this was the cornerstone for Martin Wagner's reflections on the growing house, and they were laid on this Siam Congress. The standard work of Wagner bearing the same name, The Growing House, appeared in 1932 in occasion of the exhibition of a series of one-to-one models of growing houses at the Berlin Fairground. The show entitled Sonne, Luft und Haus für alle was launched after a competition of growing houses and took part in from May to August in 1932. And this competition was also very interesting because then more because more than 1,000 architects took part. In his book, bearing the title The Growing House, Wagner published the designs for the Sachsenhauer house, which were created by the members of a study group he had organized. All projects I show here are from this study group. Here I show the project of Hans Schaun, who presented this interesting form of extension, as you can see above. Most of the well-known architects of the interwar period took part in Wagner's study group. For example, Walter Gropius, who concerned himself with a growing house which should be produced at a running volume on the basis of an existing pattern of houses made out of copper. You can see here the extension plans as well as the settlement planning, but the crucial point of Gropius' designs were this construction concept he also presented in Wagner's book. And also Gropius' design was shown at Berlin Fairground. Wagner discussed the topic of the growing house and in front of the background of three accustomed factors: the general deficiency of financial capital at his time, the growth of families, and a change in views of how people lived in utilized rooms. Already at this point, it is remarkable that Wagner realized a crucial fact, namely the never-ending, in a deep philosophical, in an existentialist sense, as a solution for one of the main problems of housing. He figured out that growing families require a form of housing that also increases in size, and the Sachsenhauer house should be the basis for this. Therefore, nothing finished should be planned for families, but a model of housing should be invented which stays in progress and which follows planned economics. Here, the concept of of Hans Bölzig, who was one of the closest friends of Wagner and his ideas. The importance of the relationship between leisure and housing. At the same time, it assumes in Wagner's far-sighted ideas that the working world will change, and through it also the way people live because of shorter employee work hours in the future. He concludes that more leisure time asks for new cities and new forms of housing. And there he was an opponent of large cities and believed rather in the origin of new types of cities which up to 200,000 inhabitants that lived in naturally embedded houses. He said, the crowded tenement house located directly next to the factory was the suitable system for the 15-hour day, where leisure time was only converted into sleep. The growing house is meanwhile the accustomed type for the 5-hour day, and to this extent today yet for many appears wish and hope. And he concluded in saying a 14-hour day creates the tenement houses and a 1 or 2-hour day the villa. The Sachsenhauer house consists, according to Martin Wagner, of a core house of 25 square meters that can grow in architectural regard onto the basis of different models, have floors added, rooms extended, and have concentric expansion. He assumed that neither the prices for the materials or manufacturing of the house were making the building cost rocket, but rather only the transport costs. It was not anything new for the time, but under these conditions he pleaded for the absolute building cost to be changed through the industrialization of production, and every house to be delivered broken down into small single pieces. Here I show the house for the project for a growing house, which was designed by Wagner himself, which is interesting because Wagner presents a concentric growth around the core house in the very center. You can see it on the upper plan Step by step, the central point of Wagner's statements always remained the subject of the dynamics. The saver, he said, does not order the whole house anymore from the builder in the future, but only the house components. Construction is not a one-time act anymore, but a repeated activity. The citizen buys the additional rooms according to his growing needs or his growing savings. Er baut auf Stottern, he said. He builds step by step. Here again, the picture of Wagner's design. After the breakdown of the building industry in 1931 and a visit to the Soviet Union, Wagner sought for himself to sketch out even more radical plans. With regard to the financing of the core houses, he had the view that the state should pay for the erection costs and the citizens for the extension using Zwecksparen, a special special purpose saving. In parallel, he dedicated a chapter to the question of the release of land and was kicked by his sense of justice regarding the land as goods that do not produce, so it should not be paid for. For him, the idea of private property was not compatible with the idea of land. The land should be consequently leased out when required as property of the state. His goal was to make a constitutional amendment that made land collective community property that anyone could lease or utilize according to deed without capital expenditure in form of a selling price. With this, I show the plan of the settlement, also designed by Wagner himself. The rationalization of happiness, Wagner compared with Otto Neurath. On many points, the thesis of Otto Neurath and Martin Wagner that worked at the development of new organizations, forms of building and financing, enabled many persons to live in their own small homes. Yet, if the question concerned asking about which was the most rational house or type of production for this small fortune, they differed especially. First, Otto Neurath. Strangely enough, the national economist Otto Neurath constructed in his drafts the principle of self-help and represented the view that the settlers should be involved in the building process of their own house, the building of common facilities, and the development works of the settlement. For example, street work, as you can see here. Following this concept, it was important for him to bear the maintenance of the autonomy of the collectives in mind. Martin Wagner, in contrast to the amateur national economist Wagner, he appeared to be a strict opponent of the while settling self-help, and in addition formulated the important guiding principle that das wachsende Haus and all of its technical ideas were incompatible with self-help. Yes, he disqualifies self-help and concludes that as an architect, he assumes that building a house is work of precision and attains that the settlers as untrained master builders in the erection of a house will not be very efficient in achieving goals. He said, if I did amateur work in community service, volunteer charity work, I would therewith only change the calculation costs. It can be summed up that Martin Wagner designed a comprehensive model for a top-down organized, positivist and residential building reform modeled after planned economy and with every detail and consequence really well thought out. His ideas ranged from the technical equipment of the growing house up to rationalization proposals for its use, which are also very interesting, but I cannot present them here. But he never deceived unnoticed in this context about essential aspects of his model requiring target development. First, of inexpensive expanding utility installations, for example, the expanding size of heating systems. Second, the city's structural formation and the measures for long-term legal protection for the wachsende Siedlung, the growing settlement. He said, the anticipated expansion of land is not an uneconomical structural action of the city and is not comparable to what we can observe today with wild or unorganized settlements. Martin Wagner's thoughts of designing das wachsende Haus created excited attention at the time, but is unfortunately really forgotten. The developmentally capable subject of the growing house has not been pursued further in the dimension planned by Wagner since the time of the National Socialist takeover in 1933. In the years 1931 and 1932, he still evoked much interest with his ideas and even had an export of his work to Vienna. Here I show the winning project of the Vienna competition under the name Das wachsende Haus, the growing house, by Leopold Pontzen, who is even also completely forgotten architect in Vienna. Martin Wagner and Turkey. As a declared social democrat and representative of new architecture, Wagner had to leave Germany soon after the takeover of the Nazis. From 1935 until 1938, he worked in Turkey, among other things, as urban construction advisor of the city of Istanbul. In 1938, he emigrated to the USA and became professor for urban planning at Harvard University. Even in Harvard, he worked on projects related to the idea of the growing house, for example, for military use or for disaster relief. Here I show the project of Eagle Homes he created in 1940 and a project he offered to the Turkish parliament after the terrible earthquake in eastern Anatolia in 1939. The contributions that were submitted in the competition Das wachsende Haus contained in part detailed plans for the realization of standardized and producible residential dwellings, and many of them still appear modern. Yet, not only the view of the competition projects or the book and they contained suggestions on architecture, construction, engineering and urban planning would be valuable, but also the political and business economic aspects should be examined again today. Because as a project of reform, das wachsende Haus, understood as an example, has the potential to enrich any current discussion concerning informal settling or problems with living space procurement, especially during times of a global and real estate crisis. And with this final statement, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask a question to Bettina. I wonder about the relationship between Wagner and others and the more, let's say, influential side of modernist master like Le Corbusier. I mean, like, for example, at the Siam 1929 or after that, what were their relationship? Because from Wagner's side, from your presentation, he and his colleagues looked very rationalized and social oriented ways. So I just wonder about how, for example,
the missing link.
Yeah.
At first, again, this is the first presentation of the work I will for the next time. What I cannot say now and here is if there was a direct link between Otto Neurath and Martin Wagner. But we know Otto Neurath is a person who had relations to everybody, nearly everybody at his time. He was an extremely communicative person, and he wrote letters. He had contacts to everybody at his time. So I think that there I can find somewhere the missing link, the direct missing link between those two persons. But the interesting fact there was that at first I found out that there was a competition about the growing house in Vienna. I did not know anything about the German one. The one in Vienna was in 1932. And if you think of the preparatory work Otto Neurath had realized in Vienna during the early 1920s, so for me there was at first the missing link between those preparatory, this preparatory work Otto Neurath had realized and what happened at the early 1930s. So this was the first thing I was thinking about. But I think there's really a close relationship between those two because of their positivist embossed thinking, which was new at the time, and you always should recognize that Martin Wagner not only acted as an architect, but he wrote a book about the national economic background of his thinking. The architectural work was done by others, more or less. His work, his principal work, was a national economic work and a philosophical one. And he calculated the details, so you can read it in the proceedings. He calculated how can people manage to arrive to house extensions when they buy a core or build a core house and so on. So yeah, I hope I will find all the missing links.
Thank you.
I have a question for you two. I think the topic of a growing house is quite interesting. Indeed, in the 30s, it was also the years where people could only see progress. And to me, there's a question about the growing house, is that a family grows indeed, but at some point it decreases also. I mean, you have children going out of the house, so what about a decreasing house? How does it work? Because it's going to grow to some point, and then at some point it's going to be too big. So is there a sense in making your house grow, or would it be better for people to move from one house to another, depending on their stage in life?
At the time of Wagner, he did not think of children growing up and going out of the house. So he thought of how to make people live in a small fortune. So that was nothing he thought about. But you're right. The fact of the moving house is also linked with this idea of the growing house. And there, one of the main projects and the most thought out was the one of Walter Gropius, who who designed a form of growing houses on an existing patent by the mining industry at the time. And those houses of copper already existed. They were planned by the mining industry, which was owned by a very, very rich Jewish family. And this family thought of growing houses before Wagner started to make his ideas living, because they were Zionists and they wanted to prepare a form of house for Jewish people going to Palestine. And so you can find in Haifa today 3 or 4 houses made of copper which were produced in Germany, near Berlin, and which were moved to Palestine. But the moving house is also included with this idea, but not how should I say, making a house smaller. This could be the next, or one of the next steps of my work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a great time.
Okay, we have 10 minutes coffee break now, as usual.